In this episode, we follow Madigan's trail eastward across the desert, toward the Hay River, and then finally on to Birdsville, where conditions get a little more interesting. I'm sitting perched atop this dune in the middle of the Simpson, and I don't know exactly why I keep coming back. Probably just the solitude, maybe, the sense of space. It's just a place to come and just be. It's a place where you can just be. I know that sounds a bit silly, but that's how it feels. There's nothing really else exists when you're out here. It's just this landscape and me. And it's very humbling, the desert. Yep, the white ox certainly does love the desert. And the Simpson has to be one of the most magical of all. I never cease to be struck by the richness of the red sands, contrasting with those deep blue skies. That distinctive redness of the sand that characterises the heart of the Simpson, and indeed so much of Central Australia, is actually iron oxide, or, in layman's terms, rust. As well as being one of our favourite explorers, Madigan was also a geologist. So, we'll let him do the explaining. The red colour is due to a fine coating of oxide of iron on the grains of quartz, Madigan explains. If boiled in acid, the grains quickly become quite clear and colourless. This coating only forms under arid conditions, which is why beach sands are never red. It takes a long time to form, so that young dunes are usually white or yellow. The sand ridges near the Diamantina are continually being built up by sand from the river deltas, so that the ridges are white along the river, and gradually become redder towards the interior of the desert, until they are as red as rouge. Although the desert looks unusually green and lush for this time of year, the track conditions here on day 6 give very little indication of what was to come. We had heard loosely on the grapevine, via the Ox's satellite phone, that there had been some rain around Birdsville, but no information with regards to track conditions. In any case, we'd come much too far now to consider turning back, and our fuel reserves would have prevented it anyhow. So it's on to Camp 15, described by Madigan as the best camp of the whole journey, where the Madigan line meets the Hay River. For another superb evening, under a beautiful starlit desert sky. So after following the Hay River for several kilometres, taking the party south, Madigan camped here at Camp 16, and from Camp 16 he took the party again east across the dunes. But before he did so, he blazed this tree,
with the initial M for Madigan 39, the year 1939. He wrote in his diary, "I would be much interested to know who next sees this tree." And for many years probably nobody did see that blaze, but of course today the blaze is no longer visible, but this was the tree. This is a cute little pocket here. It's another little sort of, not a lot of shrubbery growing here or spinifex vegetation, but there's so many wildflowers on it at the moment. It's almost glowing purple.
The party had actually travelled further north than originally intended, partly as a result of visiting the clay pans, roughly about midway on the expedition. So from the Hay River on, Madigan took the party southeast, heading towards Birdsville. As you move down through this part of the Channel Country, you'll come across the ruins of the old station at Annandale. In the early 1870s, a young boy, barely 13, left his home in Adelaide on an ageing one-eyed mare he called Cyclops. He had 5 shillings in his pocket, a swag, and a burning ambition. It was here, on the edge of the Simpson Desert, that Sydney Kidman purchased Annandale Station in 1896. It was to be the beginning of an empire, and Kidman would go on to become the largest landholder in the world, holding more stock than anyone before or since. The young Kidman had a hunch that to really succeed in this game of chess against the elements, you had to think big. Really big. And by strategically purchasing large amounts of land around various parts of the country, he might be able to continuously move his stock in order to take advantage of the conditions, and in doing so, drought-proof his business forever. The plan worked. For a while at least. In fact, the whole story of Kidman and his empire is one of enormous success, followed by unimaginable loss. And just when the empire was on the brink of collapse, like Lazarus rising, he would somehow build it all back up again. Bigger and stronger than ever. I've never completely understood Kidman's motivations. I don't think it was about money for him, and I don't think it was about power and greed either. It's a fascinating rags to riches story of how a man with little to no education came to be the cattle king of Australia. A hard-working and disciplined man, devoutly religious, he never swore, never smoked, and never drank. A miserly penny pincher with an almost pathological hatred for waste. He was also an incredibly generous philanthropist. He demanded total loyalty from his staff and hard work. 7 days a week. Stories abound, such as the time Kidman had a veranda on one of his properties torn down because he had found a few of the men resting in the shade when they were supposed to have been working. Or the time he spent a day picking up bent nails and straightening them so that they could be used again. Yet he gave large amounts of money to the Inland Mission, heavily supported the Royal Flying Doctor Service, and when World War I broke out, he supplied aircraft to the Royal Australian Air Force and horses and equipment to the troops. All of his workers who served in the conflict were guaranteed a job upon their return. A pension for those who returned injured, and even a pension for the families of those who never returned.
Well, I have here with me something a lot of people would recognise. This is a R.M. Williams elastic-sided riding boot. And interesting story. Well, R.M. Williams, of course, is a very well recognised brand here in Australia and indeed overseas. But what a lot of people might not realise is he started out as Sydney Kidman's saddler. So as Reg Williams himself tells it, he went down to the offices of Kidman in Curry Street in Adelaide, seeking payment for some leather goods that he'd made. And Kidman said, "No worries, just put it on a 30-day account and we'll sort it out at the end of the month." And Reg said, "Well, look, I can't wait 30 days for payment. I need the money right now. I can't even wait 30 hours, I need the money for the raw materials." Kidman looked at him, gave a bit of a smile and wrote out a cheque straight away and gave him the money. But it's an interesting story because without Sydney Kidman, R.M. Williams would never have got his start.
Reg Williams, with inspiration from many skilled Adnyamatla people from Nepabunna in the Flinders Ranges, and legendary old stockmen like Dollar Mick, would go on to create an empire almost rivaling Kidman himself. But that's a whole other story.
Well, this is definitely bush bashing, Len Bedell style bush bashing. We cannot really stay in the track for a lot of it because it's just too muddy.
Once you leave Annandale, the current Madigan line tracks slightly west of the original due to pastoral leases in the area. It soon joins up with the QAA, the French petroleum line, established in 1964. It's here we really start to get an indication of just how much rain had fallen around Birdsville and its effect on the tracks. Now, ordinarily, we wouldn't recommend detouring so far off the track as we have done. Besides the damage to the tracks, there's also the increased risk of vehicle damage and the accumulation of spin effects. However, the conditions here made it almost impossible to stay on course, and turning back was definitely not an option.
Now, at certain times of the year, spin effects can be a real hazard for desert travellers. It tends to accumulate anywhere it can underneath areas of the car, and it's full of a flammable resin, and if it gets caught around somewhere hot like the exhaust, it can cause a vehicle fire, and once it starts to burn, it can be very difficult to extinguish.
Interestingly, we have the explorer David Carnegie to thank for the popularisation of the term spin effects, when in fact It is not a spinifex grass at all. As Madigan explains, the genus Spinifex is mainly a coastal sand dune grass, civilised and tractable. The universal, spiky, hemispherical masses, typical of the whole of the Central Australian sandy deserts, belong to another genus, Triodia, a much more forbidding plant, among which even camels and horses pick their way. Its popular name is more properly porcupine grass, but Spinifex has become attached to it, and we will let it stay. It is too late, Madigan says, to tell David Carnegie that his book should have been called Porcupine and Sand.
Just coming over one of the dunes in the QAA, and this is what we're up against. It's the base of each dune, there's more or less a gigantic lake. It's crazy. The Simpson as you've never seen it before. Certainly not as I've ever seen it before. It's the greatest. See where these tracks go. People have found their way somehow. That's what we're gonna do. Well, that's interesting. It's not a Simpson crossing, it's more like going up Cape York just after the wet. Jesus.
The problem here was the further we went, the wetter it got, and the bigger the lakes, the longer the detours.
Well, we're once again having to traverse some of the worst sections. We're trying to see if we can keep it clean now all the way to Birdsville. Not far to Big Red, actually. Apart from this water, I've never ever in all the times I've been here, seen the dunes this firm and easy to traverse. They are rock solid. But I suppose it makes sense with all that rain and everything. Sort of picking our lines. Everyone's done the same thing, but it gets a bit pooey here.
Yep, something had to give.
This is the stuff cramped over.
After one too many recoveries like this one, it was decided to take a different tact. Now Brad is no slouch in the off-road stakes either. He was a transport driver in the army, and between the two of us, there's a lot of four-wheel drive experience. Brad reckoned we might be better off sticking to the track. Sure, the mud holes were longer and deeper, but there was traction, and being on the track, rather than detouring out into the wilderness, started to make more sense.
Stop, Jade.
We might have to put the boot into it, but given that we're on the track, and this is a desert after all, We figured there's very little chance of hitting an unseen log or rock. So to that end, it was time to put the theory to the test. Brad and Jane, after you.
Through, you are going to have to go in pretty hard. It goes into one deep section in there and you'll start dragging your diff a bit.
Well, that was a lot of fun. Well done, Oxy. You got us through once again, as you always do. You're a good rig. I'm sorry that I put you through hell, but that's what you're there for. As unusual as these desert conditions are, amazingly, Madigan's expedition found much the same. He writes, "This was most extraordinary. To come out on the edge of what is commonly thought to be, and usually is, a burning arid desert, and find ourselves, when not held up by rain, struggling along, freezing cold, through bogs of mud, and threading our way between pools of water. We suffered from a surfeit and not a lack of water in those later stages. The White Ox can certainly relate."
Big Red should be coming into sight soon.
Heading east across the desert, you'll cross approximately 1,100 sand dunes, and due to the prevailing winds, they're arranged in linear formation. The dunes get progressively bigger the further east you go, until, at the very end, you get to this one, Naparanika, or Big Red, as it's more commonly known.
Yep, that's Big Red.
So there she is, Big Red. Only difference is we've also got to get across that bloody lake first before we can even have a crack at Big Red. So that'll be interesting in itself. you should sail through that one.
Northwest sailing, hang on.
Well, normally the hard part's making it up Big Red, but this time the hard part is getting to Big Red. Well, we made it. We're here. Hardest bit was crossing that lake, pretty much, over there. But here we are, finally, on Big Red.
And like any east-west Simpson Desert crossing, it wouldn't be complete without a trip to the Birdsville pub for a well-earned beverage. Not even Madigan's considerably better drilled and disciplined expedition party would have missed that one.
Old Brush Harbor's by the side of the road. I remember them so clearly. Mom and Dad loved them so dearly. Old Brush Harbor's by the side of the road.
It's almost intimidating. Except I do like the camera, I don't know, maybe I've got a big ego or something.
But yeah, what about this one just shuts up when you turn the camera on?
Yep.
Yep.
I probably should.
Old Brush Harbor's by the side of the road, where a sinner could lay down his heavy load. It was in those old brush harbors troubled souls found peaceful harbors. Brush harbors by the side of the road. Many times I have departed from the way of life I started, in an arbor by the side of the road. But each time the devils caught me, I remembered what they taught me in brush arbors by the side of the road. Old brush arbors by the side of the road, where the mighty light of God's great mercy glowed. There was praying, shouting, singing, till the countryside was ringing. Brush arbors by the side of the road. Old brush arbors by the side of the road.